As life continues, some things change and some things stay the same. But one thing that'll never change in this stream is that this freaking thing is always going to be on the ground, okay? I will never not let that happen. So as you guys can very well see by the change in scenery, I have moved locations and I haven't exactly had enough time in order to set up the walls the way that I want to yet. So we're gonna, take a couple of days for me to figure out how exactly to spruce up this place to make it look more me. But I've got plenty of ideas, and as you can very clearly see, a lot of things are going to be looking very similar to how the wall used to be. But that's not why you guys clicked on this video. You guys clicked on this video to figure out what the top 5 decks are, and guess what? I've been doing a lot of research because I haven't been playing a lot of Hearthstone these past couple of days because of the obvious. But I will say this, I've been playing like about an hour each night since my move has been taking place, and I do believe there's a lot of interesting things happening with this meta. So if you like this kind of content, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel to let me know what you think about the change of, well, hold on a minute, this is the wrong screen now, we're in the Matrix. But if you take a look at HSReplay of the global meta, things are looking a little bit healthier because we at least have 5 classes that are above a 50% win rate. But if you look at these other classes, it's Mage and Warrior are still not doing really well, even though I think the Druid stats are a little bit skewed because people don't know how to play Druid very properly. But at the same time, if we take a look at what the meta has changed into according to HSReplay, there are a lot of interesting decks that have popped up, especially within the last day, because if you check the last day, oh, okay. Alright, so this Big Demon Hunter, when I was streaming last night for an hour, was actually at a 56% win rate because a bunch of people were playing this archetype. And well, if you check out these decks right here in the past couple of days, it seems that people are starting to get success with Aggro, and there's even someone doing well with Naga Mage. So there's still a lot of changes that can happen. But as of right now, I think it's safe to say that we know the decks that are going to be very good versus the decks that are just going to probably be a meme or two for a couple of days as people figure out the best list, such as the Big Demon Hunter, for example. But there is a lot of potential from these decks. So let me go ahead and show you what my picks are for the quote-unquote top 5 decks in Hearthstone right now. As you can see by this list, Demon Hunter is a very real winner because there are a lot of decks that I want to show you to kind of enlighten you guys to the evolution of Big Demon Hunter. So at first I thought this deck was just big bait because it's just like you look at this deck and it looks like a giant pile of cards. And not necessarily like, like these cards are bad, but they just don't synergize very well together. Such as, Lady Sitheno being in this deck really doesn't help out the consistency of this deck. It's supposed to be like your early game in order to help clear the way, use your spells, so that way your fail spell Evoker is actually ready to go on turn 6. But there was, a card that a lot of people were forgetting about for a second, and it's Crush Claw Enforcer, which is essentially a third copy of Fail Scale Invoker if you have this in hand, so you could just use this to, better to do the combo. And I believe Funky Monkey ended up, finding a deck with this sort of success where he put in the Warblades for lifesteal, has multi-strike in order to kind of like use your hero to clear the board as you make way for the big turns, because the big turns are really impressive. I will say this now, All Spell Breaks Loose is one of my least favorite cards in the history of Hearthstone because this card just didn't synergize with anything and it was always like the worst random card to get, It just felt like it was put into the game to be a bad random card. Well, not anymore, because we obviously knew that its synergy with G-Lag is pretty insane, because you just play G-Lag and this thing gets immediately infused, and since there are 3 demons that come back, and there are 5 pieces technically, if you high roll the G-Lag, then it summons a board, of the other 4, while you bring back 2 other ones because of board space. So, like, this can literally just fill up your entire board with a bunch of stocks that just deal 2 damage. But if you haven't even done that, you can also bring back Ildari Inquisitor and Brilliant Annihilon. This card is, I had to have a double take when I saw this yesterday because this looks like a fake card, It's got such an insane, it's got a lot going for it. Taunt, Rush, so if you cheat it out, it's suddenly a big meaty card, but if you also have to, get value out of it immediately, you can just smack into a big minion and then also deal damage with it. So it's, it's pretty interesting in that perspective. But All Spell Breaks Loose is very real in this deck. It's just about trying to figure out how we survive until these turns actually start winning the game. And so now we take a look at the Big Game Hunter, the big, NoHands gamer list, sorry, that's a bit of a mouthful, and actually kind of enlighten me to Abyssal Depths. Because think about it, you immediately draw your Crush Claw Enforcer, or you immediately draw the Silver Moon Arcanist, so that way you always have Unleash Fel as soon as you possibly can. And the early game, like, you're fine with passing, like, your turn 3 if you're going to do, like, an Immolation or a combo. So as much as I like Blood Mage Thalnos in this kind of deck, it just makes a little bit more sense to always have the consistent +2 spell damage. And if you end up drawing the minions, you still have Fellerin, and you still have Raging Fel Screamer. So this card seems to be a perfect inclusion as a one-of, because you still have the late game demon package, but now you actually have this early game with like Immolation Auras, with Unleash Fel, Taste Chaos, and, you know, randomness out of the Eldari studies, which is always filling your Invoker potential, so that way this deck is just very consistent. I don't think this is going to be like an insane tier 1 deck by any means, but it's worth noting that Big Demon Hunter is a deck that's not really just a meme, but people are having consistent success with it. And I'm not going to be able to have Twitter posts for every single deck that I posted, but I just really wanted to show you guys the potential of Big Demon Hunter, because apparently NoHands Gamer was able to take this deck 25-11. So I don't think this is a meme, dude. This might actually have like a place in the meta. Maybe it's not the best deck in the game by any means, but just the evolution of this deck is just very interesting to highlight. Now moving onward to what I believe is the best deck in the game, and I hate to say it, this is also the most boring deck in the game, but I mean, hey, if you want to win Hearthstone games, this is the way to go right now. Spell Demon Hunter is just the most frustrating deck because Sinful Brand into Fladori Warband is an insane combo that can deal, let's see, 8 plus 4, so 12 damage for still 6 mana, man. Like, it's insane how this combo used to be almost double because it was 20 damage. But still, Sinful Brand and Fladori Warband definitely carry this deck to where everything else that this deck can do just feels a little bit unfair, since you have this amazing combo in really the form of 2 cards. And you don't really have that much, you know, mana cheat going on with this deck, but you still have Lady Setheno in the deck in order to give you insane face damage, and there's actually some people that have gone so far to put in Abusive Sergeant, so maybe you guys want to play Abusive Sergeant again. But this deck just feels very unfair to go against, and that's one thing that I just really don't like about it, because if you play for the board, you get Silvermoon Arcanist into Unleash Fel. If you end up not playing anything at all, you just get Lady Setheno comboed, and if you end up like playing a minion, then suddenly you get Sinful Brand into Fladori Warband as well, so it's just like, no matter what you do, this deck seems to always have an answer for it. So in terms of like, you know, interactivity and how much I enjoy this deck being on the ladder, this is definitely one that I could probably see a couple people wanting to get rid of, because I don't like it either. And I think I said something about Abusive Sergeant earlier. Yeah, Pocket Train has been playing this deck on his ladder climb, and I think he ended up hitting rank 6th legend after he climbed all the way from the regular diamond ranks. So like, yeah, this deck is just going to get a lot more popular, especially in the top tier legend ranks. So if you don't like Spell Demon Hunter, watch how far you climb. And continuing on this Demon Hunter train, relics are still good. There's really not much to say about this deck. Yes, Rowdy Fan did get nerfed, but Rowdy Fan and Lady Setheno is still 5 damage. If you think about it, going from 5 to 6 is technically kind of a big hit, because now you have to cast 6 spells instead of 5, which really doesn't sound that, you know, that complicated because we're playing Relic Demon Hunter. But sometimes in some situations, it can make a difference. And the last Demon Hunter deck that we'll talk about is Outcast. There's really not much else to talk about this deck either. Like, it's the same old Outcast Demon Hunter, although I will say that this deck is not as easy as a lot of people think it is. You really want to make sure that you're playing your specific matchups very well, because there are times where you want to just dump your entire hand and get all of the, you know, damage on the field as quickly as possible. There are other times where you have to try and catch your opponent off guard by playing a bunch of 1/1s, so that way if they survive, you can play your Halvera Dark Raven in order to get a bunch of damage all in one turn. And there's other matchups to where you have to be able to play your Wretched Exile in order to get even more value out of your Outcast cards. Because imagine having that previous game plan that I just talked about with an infinite number of securities, so you always have minions on the board. So Outcast Demon Hunter may be a deck that's very frustrating for some people to go up against, but just know that this deck is a little bit more complicated than you're probably giving it credit for. And now let's get into the decks that aren't Demon Hunter, because my god, there are a lot of Demon Hunter decks, and didn't we just have some buffs? Yeah, I guess we'll just not think about that for a second. But yeah, let's go through these other decks that have already been, you know, kind of a staple for a while. Like, Miracle Rogue is still really good right now. There's not really much to say outside the fact that people are playing Queen Ashara again. And this really wasn't even like, you know, 100% a card that people were agreeing on. But Meaty climbed to Legend with this specific deck, and Cult Neophyte seems to be in now because of its synergies with Shadow Step. I'm not sure if this is trying to stop like a specific matchup, or if this is maybe trying to gimp the mirror so that way they can't do Shadow Step combos. But Cult Neophyte seems to be working in a meta where Rogue is able to play as the aggressor, and it wants to stop people from doing anything. In the previous meta, Miracle Rogue was kind of a bit more defensive because it had to come back on the board a lot more times, but I think now they're trying to play a bit more proactively. And even though Druid is like the 9th worst class in the game right now, I just don't understand where those stats are coming from, because I believe it's either the other Druid decks that are really bringing down the power of Druid because they're really not that good. Like, there are some good Druid decks out there that don't run, you know, a Nubricon, but when you compare them to what a Nubricon can do and their consistency, it's not going to look good in the stats, unfortunately. But Tony Druid is still performing very well. The Attorney at Maw into the Nubricon combo, in fact, hold on a minute, this deck doesn't even have the Mosher, so this should be 1 Attorney at Maw, 1 Mosher. I think this deck had like an ETC, but like I couldn't find the cards to put into the ETC, so like I made a little bit of changes, but this deck should still perform fairly well. But one thing to keep in mind is that if you have the Mosher combo, then suddenly your Flower Child combo may not work 100% correctly. So something that you can do if you don't like this particular list is to do this and to put in an ETC. And honestly, I wish I could tell you what cards would go best in ETC, and I think it's something along the lines of like War Rider into the All Silence card, the Smothering Starfish, and then maybe like a Theatar if you're trying to like be favorable into the mirror and take like a specific card. But ETC is one of those cards to where, you know, a lot of people talk about like Crazed Alchemist and whatnot, but I think I said this in a previous video. Crazed Alchemist is really not that good in this deck, because if you play the big taunt combo, you're probably already winning the game, and it's not like you need to switch the HP of everything in order to kill matchups like Blood Death Knight, for example. It might be a secondary win condition that might be good, but I think it's just, you know, a what if within a what if within a what if, and it's just not worth it to think about the 0.0% games that it's going to help you with. Notice how I said 0.0%, because it literally doesn't feel like this card wins any games at all. But if you're wanting to play Tony Druid, this is the way of going about it. But if you want to play something that isn't Tony Druid, then, well, how about I interest you in the deck that that was in my my last video before I moved? It's Ozumat Druid. You should maybe go check it out, because apparently this deck is unchanged, and it's kind of the reason why I thought about what to put into the ETC in the previous deck, because it just makes sense. You have Smothering Starfish to maybe stop like the Frost DKs that you will see, because they do still exist. They definitely still do exist. You have Rivendare in matchups that where you want to be able to OTK, like against maybe Blood DK if you get lucky enough. And you have Jailer against matchups like against Druid, where if you can slap this down and summon up like a 2-turn lethal, then you just win the game. But Ozumat Druid is like the most slept on deck in this entire meta, because it is a very difficult deck to pilot. You have to have your synergies, and sometimes you have to go for like these random outs and then work with what you're being given. Ozumat is an actually good card when you combine it with Hedge Maze, and depending if you're fighting like, you know, ghosts from Rogue, now suddenly you have a way to beat that as Druid, and that is not something that I believe should be slept on, especially when you think about how Summer Flower Child can make Ozumat 7 mana, so that we can play Hedge Maze Ozumat in the same turn. And you're Druid, you're going to have 10 mana at some point. But in any case, Ozumat Druid is looking really good right now, but keep in mind, this is a difficult deck to play. Druid is not a straightforward class like it used to be when you just had Astalor combo automatically winning the game without doing any math. Now let's talk about Death Knight, because guess what? Death Knight is still good right now, but the best Death Knight deck, according to the stats, is actually Unholy? And I think it's just because like games are getting ended games are ending faster now apparently. And this deck, since it lost literally its 2 worst matchups, Frost DK and Blood DK to a degree, because they're not as popular. They're still popular, but this deck is queuing into other things now. But oh my lord, it can actually like breathe. It can actually deal damage now. And well, I just now realized that my deck is entirely golden, so I might be playing this deck on stream today, because I only need to get like 23 Death Knight wins in order to finally get 1,000 wins. It's been way too long. But in any case, this deck is still really good if you want to play an aggro deck that's just, you know, Unga Bunga, hit face, maybe do something random every now and again with School Teacher and Nerubian Vizier. But some people have gotten the crazy idea, hey, wait a minute. Mermy is undead and a Murloc, so it works with a Vizier, and we can also put in Murlocio, which is also another undead Murlocio. Well, you know what? Why not just put in a Gorlock Ravager in order to make this deck have some consistent card draw? And honestly, there's a lot of people claiming this deck is good right now, where I think NoHands Gamer was playing this list, and I believe top 50 legend? I mean, he queued into like 70, so like, it's not really that impressive in terms of like, oh my god, it's the end of the month, it's top 50 legend. There's not a lot of people that are populating it, but this deck is still performing very, very well to get to legend and then maintain your legend. So Maybe he maintains top 50 Legend going into the next couple of days with this deck, and then suddenly my opinion will change on it. But this is a deck that I'm going to be testing later today, but a lot of people have been talking about this specific list. This is not just one person that I'm getting this from. And honestly, the idea of having, like, Mermy synergies with getting extra corpses, being able to work with, like, your Murloc, for example, like, that just kind of makes sense in my eyes. And then suddenly, you have a 0-mana card that can work with your Rancher, and then there's just a lot of synergies that are going on here. And I like this idea because it's a different change on something that we've had for a long time now. Blood DK really hasn't changed all too much, but trust me, it is very much alive right now to the point where some players are even saying that it is S tier. And I'll just go ahead and pull out this list from Norwis. He's already Legend as the first day of the season, but this is what he's saying are the best decks. And honestly, I found this morning, so I had made my list ready to go. Found this tweet as well as NoHands Gamer's tweet to kind of change up things a little bit. And I just kind of find it funny that his list is very, very similar to mine, and I haven't even really played the game all too much this past week. So let's go. W's for Clark. But I would honestly argue that Frost DK feels significantly weaker, but Norwis is a freaking Frost DK main at the moment now that he can't play Priest. But in any case, Blood DK is still a really good deck. I don't know if this is the perfect 40 because I'm not 100% sure on Quarter, for example. This is the one card that kind of raises an eyebrow for me. But I'm not really sure what I would change it out for outside of like an ETC and going for like Theatar if you're trying to counter specific matchup, but things seem to be a bit more aggressive, so fighting for board might actually make some sense. But trust me, Blood DK is very much alive right now. And running at the end of the pack, in my opinion, is actually Frost DK, and it's kind of surprising. Like, I thought this deck would be really good still because, you know, Frostworm Fury is still an insane card, but the biggest thing that was really, you know, milking the wins out of this deck, I hate to say, was the random Frostworm Furies that would come from Frost Strikes, that would come from Nerubian Viziers, and then you just have School Teacher not necessarily finding, you know, insane cards like Frostworm Fury, but, you know, Vampiric Bloods. There was a lot of insane cards that, you know, the Triple Rune Death Knight cards could provide this deck, and it makes sense that, you know, cutting it to, you know, just your Frostworm Furies to where you can only run 2, and if you want a high roll, you have to run Death Whisper. No one seems to want to run this card, even though I absolutely love what this card can do, and it's just, it sucks. I wanted this Legendary to be good, because if you have this, plus the Reborn location, then you can get as many Frostworm Furies as you want, but let's be honest, we're not in Christmas Wonderland. This is never going to work unless the meta is extremely slow. But this is the thing. Frostworm Fury still wins against, you know, board-based decks, so I would still recommend this deck if you're just trying to get a quick climb and if you're only fighting, like, Paladins and whatnot. But I will admit that this deck does feel a lot worse because you don't have as much of those freezes happening. And the Fritz Dara nerf, it makes sense. Like, this card is honestly just about the immediate value that you get. The 5/6 was an extra card, was an extra bonus on top of that. But you still have a lot of synergies here that I don't think you necessarily need to, you know, disenchant if you think this deck is weak. This could still win games very effectively. I'm not going to talk about Priest a whole lot, but Priest is pretty good right now. Undead Priest is just a hell of a deck when it high rolls, and honestly, one thing that I'm starting to hate is Banshee with Undying Allies. Every single time I see Banshee in a deck, I want to say that it's garbage, but oh my lord, if you play like Egg on turn 2, have Coin, and then you play Undying Allies into like Banshee, where is this, Shadow Ascendant, like that is just game breaking, dude. Like this deck can do some very degenerate things, and if you don't have a way of dealing with it, then it just steamrolls games. So, quick Legend climb, here we go, play some Aggro Priest. But on the flip side, if you want to play something that's all about ruining aggro, then yeah, this Control Priest is doing really well. And this is a list, actually, from Tic Tac, who I believe is one of the best Control Priest players ever. I think I've talked about him a lot on this channel. But this is his take on the list, and the reason why I want to highlight it is because it's one of the only decks that I've seen with an audio amplifier. And the reason why this can make sense is because you're playing Control Priest. The whole point is to, you know, play until the very end of the game, so having 11 mana and having 11 cards in hand means you're always going to have one extra resource. And when you take into account when you have cards like Sister Sylvana, as well as Love Everlasting, in order to make your first Vision of Darkness always cost 1 mana, then you have a lot of ways of generating a lot of different, you know, value games. And good lord, even if you don't want to play value, you can play Rivendare, you can play Theatar, or you can play Steam Cleaner in order to prevent your opponent's Rivendare. So there's a lot going on with this deck. There are a lot of counterplays, but obviously, you know, with a vast toolkit, you have to be able to know how to use every single one of those tools. But this is one of those decks where the more you play it, the more you start to figure out the little ins and outs to where it starts to really make sense, and then you just start streaking like none other. Control Priest is obviously not going to be for everybody because these games are very long and very arduous at times. But if you're somebody that likes to actually sit down and think about their outs, this is going to be the perfect deck for you because there are just so many different ways of being able to play Control Priest. The one thing I have to say though, the mirror absolutely sucks. And for the last good deck of today, we're going to showcase Naga Mage, because Naga Mage has been getting a lot of hype, because now that 4-mana Siren is a thing, which I still can't believe, by the way. I still can't believe that this was an actual nerf, or an actual buff that they made. But hey, let's go. It's a playable archetype now, and Habu Gabu was able to climb to, I think, top 200 legend before the season ended, back in April. So, I mean, hey, man, this deck might have some potential, and it might be the most difficult deck to play in this current format because every single decision matters. And there are times where, like, obviously, you need to kind of rely on Vast Wisdom, but the main way that you're trying to win with this deck is by getting a ton of Frozen Touch values. Because think about it, if you have infused Frozen Touches, then you can rewind them, get another infused copy, which is very important, by the way. So say you have 3 infused copies of this card in your hand. If you're doing the Naga combo and you always have this to always refresh 2 mana, then you can potentially play all your Frozen Touches in one turn. And when you know, factor in Flame Geysers, any random spell damage you happen to find off of Amalgam of the Deep, or even off of the Vast Wisdom that gives you a Jellyfish, like, there's a lot of ways in order to generate a combo out of nowhere. And that's something I absolutely love about this deck, is that you need to be able to play this deck effectively and quickly. You do not have time to think. You have to go, because the last thing that you want to do is to miss APM and then suddenly not have the combo ready. But this is the thing about this deck. It's kind of like like once you figure it out, you start going faster. You have to build it up, figure out where the combo is going, and then you start slamming the cards, because you don't want to be playing too fast and then accidentally click the wrong card, because that it may sound weird, and it's like, why would you ever click the wrong card? When the rope is burning, you start to freak out when playing this deck. So it's just, sometimes that can stress you out, and that's why I've thrown a lot of games with Naga Mage. But if you want to play Naga Mage, it's probably one of the most satisfying decks to learn, and then eventually just absolutely crush anyone that you happen to go up against. But just realize that your aggro matchups are going to be the most difficult, they're going to be the most frustrating, so please just don't think this deck is garbage because it quote-unquote can't beat aggro, even though it totally can in some situations. And so to end this video, I want to show you guys 3 decks that are really, really fun to play, and 2 of them are actually my own creation, and these are like kind of ideas that I wanted to be good on the first day, but that they just didn't pan out. But this was my last version of a Lightshow Mage in order to try and make the Naga combo work, and this deck was actually cooking very, very well. I went 6-3 to start, and then I ended up going like 7-8 to end. So we had we had really high highs and then really low lows with this deck. But my god, like, the high highs were just, they were so satisfying. So if you're someone who's a Lightshow stan and you really want this card to be good, then try playing this deck and see if you can't get a potential turn 5, turn 6 lethal, because I actually did pop out a turn 6 lethal one time with this deck. But it's not going to happen consistently. It might be better to play the other Naga Mage if you really just want to go for quote-unquote consistent wins. One buff that no one is actually talking about is the buff to Death Blossom Womper, and Jombre has again just made just a killer of a deck, because he just slaps in Mask Reveler and Colossal Minions in order to just, you know, call it a day and make some of the most fun decks that you'll ever play. But Death Blossom Womper, oh man, that's kind of a mouthful, is a really effective card when you look at the Deathrattle cards that you've added into the deck. Because you do have Mask Reveler, but you also have Celestia of the Fey Court. And this is insane to pop off if you play Hedge Mage on turn 3 into coin Whomper and then get the value out of the Whomper, you get to draw a card for 8 mana less, to where you can even play a Kolok for 0 immediately, or you have a 2 mana Neptulon or a 2 mana Stillborn General. But I mean, hey, the most likely situation that can happen, Whomper just draws Stoneborn General, you summon an 8/8 with Rush. That's already good enough. And then you can throw on Tambourine on top of that, to where you get even more board after your big minions have made way for this gigantic, you know, onslaught of damage. The one thing that really kind of sucks about this deck, though, is that it's very dependent on curve, and if you don't have the right draws, then this can just feel like somewhat of a weak deck. So that's why I'm putting it towards the end of the video, because I think this is more of a fun deck than anything. But at the same time, this deck can do some pretty nutty things, and I think I ended up going, like, when I played it before I moved, I think I went like 4 and 6 with it. But it was a really interesting build, and I think that's a really fun way to try and make the Whomper work. But there's just not a lot of people that are really trying to make this card work right now, and it just kind of makes me sad, because this card going from 5 to 6, trust me, is a huge deal for Druid. If they get any of the Deathrattle cards that aren't just, you know, like little hero power cards, then maybe this card becomes like an S tier card eventually. I can already hear you guys. Clark, we got 7 warrior buffs. Where are the warrior decks? They're still bad. They're still bad, dude. I hate to say it, and I actually have a funny way in order to prove this here in a second. But this was like my idea on trying to make the Rift Warrior work, where instead of, like, you know, doing the Tony combo, by the way, one thing that I really wanted to do was to try and make Dinner Performer work with Rivendare, because the idea with this deck is that you draw the Rivendare with the Chorus Rift. But obviously, after you draw your War Rider, you can still get the value out of the Chorus Rift because you're adding minions into your deck. But one thing that I really wanted to do with Dinner Performer is that I wanted to potentially get the synergy of playing 2 Horsemen in one turn, because if you have 1 in your hand and 1 still in deck, you can play the Dinner Performer and then play the Horseman in hand in order to get 2 Horsemen on the field at the same time. And that is just a really cool combo in theory. But unfortunately, it's not really all too good, because then you have to fill in this deck with nothing but spells. And even though I have as many minions as I can muster, Warrior is still just not doing all too well. And I hate to say it, it's because of their control tools. Like, they have Blade Storm, when I believe they should just have a card called Rancor. Like, if I had Rancor in this deck, in fact, let me just go ahead and make a few suggestions. If I could make a few changes to Warrior, cards that I would want them to have again are cards like Rancor, so that way I can actually deal damage and actually, you know, gain life and sustain myself. I think that Shield Flurry or Reckless Flurry would be really interesting with a 5 mana shield block in order to give us like a mini what's it called, Shield Shatter combo, for example. It's just that the AoE options that we have right now are essentially Brawl. Like, that's the real big AoE that Warrior has right now, unless you're getting value out of like your minions or something like that. But I just really like the idea of this deck. It's definitely a big meme, but the biggest issue with Control Warrior right now is, in my opinion, its control tools. But if you guys want to see the best Warrior deck in the game, what is this? Rank 1 Warrior! Oh my god, 25 and 5 to Legend. But wait, but where are the stats though? The Mulligan Guide is cleaner. Oh, this is bait. Yeah, it's bait. Sorry, guys. I'm sorry. Warrior is just bait right now, and this is literally the best way that I can sell it. Where someone is... Turtle's a known baiter on Twitter, so this is why I absolutely knew from the very beginning that this was sus. But I mean, hey... When you know that Warrior is bad when people can literally post a rank 1 screenshot of it, and this post will do well because people really want the Warrior to be good. Granted, I haven't tested this deck yet, but I imagine that this is just not a good deck in Hearthstone. He's also running 2 Steam Cleaners, dude. So it's like, is it really that good? Probably not. I don't know. But I mean, hey, rank 1 Warrior. You guys thought I was a clickbaiter, huh? But there you guys have it. That's what I believe to be the best decks in the game right now, and hopefully I gave you guys a lot of different ideas in order to help you with your Legend climb, because there's actually a lot going on this meta, because it has opened up a decent amount thanks to these nerfs and these buffs. Not every single buff was a winner, but I believe the only way that we're going to be able to bring up Warrior and Shaman and Mage is by bringing down these other classes. And other people seem to agree, especially after this past week. But, I mean, it really does say a lot when we've done so many changes and these decks are still super, super good and still consistently on top. But you do have to give credit decks like Big Demon Hunter being a thing are definitely proving that the changes are affecting the meta, and things might evolve even from this point. So if you guys like this kind of concept, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel to be notified about any of our future updates. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. If you did make it all the way to the end of this video, if that's the case, I love you. I will see you for the next video.